Okay, so a lot of people have asked me, what is the difference between decriminalisation, legalisation, and re-legalisation? Welcome to iBelieve TV, the show that takes the mystery out of the effects and techniques the media and government use to keep you in the dark. My name's Justin Ballett, and today I'm going to be explaining to you the difference between decriminalisation, legalisation, and re-legalisation. So we all know the situation in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, marijuana is decriminalised. It's not legal, but the government chooses not to prosecute people. The government is in complete control. Therefore, they can regulate the number of plants that you can have, the amount of marijuana that you can have. They can regulate the sale of marijuana, and the coffee shops that exist have been regulated to such an extent now that nobody can apply for a new coffee shop license. If you have a coffee shop and you sell that coffee shop and the new owners do not run it as a coffee shop, it loses its license. And also the city itself of Amsterdam and the different councils are now making new rules all the time. Every year they're updating the rules, and they're making the distance away from schools larger and larger. So, and obviously the more you increase the distance from a school, eventually the areas will overlap and you'll totally and utterly eliminate all areas in Amsterdam from being able to have coffee shops. This is the way in which decriminalisation works. It means that marijuana is still a crime, and you've agreed that it's a crime. You've agreed that there's no human rights issue, and you've agreed that the government has complete control. In terms of legalisation, there are many organisations that we know that stand up and talk about legalisation. These organisations always say the exact same things. They will always tell you that they want marijuana to be legal for adults only. They want it to be legally regulated, which means permitted, and they want it to be taxed. Now, none of the organisations that call for the legalisation of marijuana will ever mention the human rights issue, and there's a very important reason why they do not mention the human rights issue. You see, human rights can never be permitted. Human rights can never be legally regulated. Human rights can never be taxed. Right now, today, in South Africa, people every single year pay a 250 Rand admission of guilt fine when they get caught with marijuana. But the way in which legalization works is that these organizations are trade unions. So they come out and they say to the government, they make a deal with the government. They say, we've got 100,000 members, and we can get all of these members to pay a 250 Rand permit fee every single year. So the government right now is making 250 Rand from every single marijuana smoker, maybe once in their lifetime. Only 10,000 people are paying these fines. Legalization is basically a form of paying a fine, but in advance. And it's not called a fine, it's called a permit. And that's the only difference. For those of you who don't remember, it was actually through taxation and regulation that the government made marijuana illegal in the first place. That's how the government makes marijuana illegal. That's the weapon that they use. They basically introduce a tax, or they regulate where or how you can use marijuana, and they just increase the regulations. So anybody who calls for the regulation, the legal regulation or the taxation of marijuana, is just giving the government the exact same weapon that they used before, and making it even easier for the government to make it illegal all over again. Re-legalisation, on the other hand, is a human rights issue. In terms of human rights and how they work, human rights are individual, and that means that you as an individual have a right to question the government to justify the law. Many people come and they say to me, oh, can I prove, Justin Ballett, can I prove that marijuana should be legal? It's not my job to prove that marijuana should be legal. It's the government's job to justify their limitations on my human rights. That's the way human rights work. You as an individual have to stand up and actually ask the government to justify their limitations. If the government can't, the law is illegal. The document that I use in order to protect myself, in order to stand up for my human rights, is called the report. This is the document, the report. It's quite a thick book, and it contains a lot of information. It contains technical information, legal information. It explains to you all of the empirical studies that have taken place on marijuana. The empirical studies are the actual human studies, where they took real human beings, real marijuana, got them to smoke the real marijuana, and then tested them in real life situations. According to Albert Einstein, he said that if you wanted to know if a scientist was lying, you just have to check empirically if what the scientist claims is true. If it's not true, the scientist is lying. And so this document, the report, contains all of these empirical studies dating back to 1836. These are the official studies on actual marijuana using populations such as Jamaica, Costa Rica, Morocco, etc., etc. They also contain the Indian studies from the British government, who at the time was in charge of South Africa. If you want to be fooled by those people who are calling for legalization, you're basically going to be giving away your human rights, because a human right can never be permitted. A human right can never be paid for. The government can never stand up and say, look, sorry, there's just far too many people in South Africa, we're way overpopulated, so everybody over the age of 50 has to be put to death. Sorry, you have to report to the pit tomorrow, but if you pay 500 Rand a month, you can then be spared. You don't pay for a human right. A human right is automatic. And so anyone who pays for a permit to the government is basically giving away their human rights. And that's what these organizations are all about. They're there to make sure that you don't have a human rights defense, you don't have the human rights issue, and you're not going to have any human rights because you're going to have agreed to permit them away. A lot of people will stand up and say, oh, but with rights come responsibility. Now, of course, the first person who said that was Adolf Hitler, and he went around and he put to death all of the mentally disabled people. Now, children do not have responsibilities, but of course they have rights. Also, mentally handicapped or mentally damaged human beings also have rights. You see, with rights, there's no such thing as responsibilities, because rights are automatic. They're not given to you when you are only responsible. They are given to you automatically as soon as you are born and you are a human being. And even children, babies that cannot be responsible, and brain-damaged human beings who cannot be responsible still have rights. So anyone who stands up and says with rights come responsibilities is basically supporting the Nazi idea, because that was Hitler's slogan, with rights come responsibilities. Rights are automatic. There's no requirement in order for you to get those rights, except to be a human being. You don't ask the government for permission. You don't pay tax to the government to have those rights. You don't get them when you only turn 18. Now you can have the rights. It's got nothing to do with the government. The government has made a deal with you. They said, we will run the country, but in order to prevent abuse, we promise to justify our actions in terms of human rights. And that means you have the power, and you are the person who needs to stand up and ask the government to justify the laws. If you do not stand up and ask the government to justify the laws, according to the government, their laws are justified automatically because you didn't complain. And if you agree to pay a permit, then you've also agreed that whatever limitation that they've placed upon you is not a human rights issue, because you are paying for the privilege to be bestowed upon you by the government. And to pay for a privilege means it's not a human right. So you got to understand that if you're not fighting for re-legalisation, that means that you are fighting for the partial legalisation or the permitted legalisation or the decriminalisation, in which case the government still maintains control and the government can tell you what to do. And the government can take away your privilege at any time they feel like it, because it's not a human right.